Well, hi, my name's Clayton, and I'm a parent of 3. It's been 2 years since we started sleeping through the night. I think that's how you're supposed to start like a talk on parenting. My wife and I have been married for nearly 14 years. We've got 3 kids. Here's the 3 kids right here. Levi, our 10-year-old, Coben, Jude, our 7-year-old, and then Nixon, our 3-year-old. She turns 4 this summer. Now, Nixon, our 3-year-old, if you ask her name, she'll tell you her name is Nixie Poo Walker. Now, just to dispel any thought or idea in your mind, we did not give her the middle name of Pooh. She just thinks that's her middle name, but we didn't give that to her. She's, I guess, internalized us calling her Nixie Poo. So, but this is our 3 kids. And Levi turned 10 this past week. So a few weeks ago, he brings us his birthday list, and one of the things on that list is this Nintendo Switch. Now, I have no idea what a Nintendo Switch is. Anybody know what I'm talking about here? You know what the Nintendo Switch is? You know what that's about? Okay, there's some of you guys right here. You're smarter than I am. I guess you're more into games than I am. Maybe you're a gamer. I'm not a gamer, okay? I don't really follow video game systems. So the best I can tell, a Nintendo Switch is a video game system that you can play on the device, and then you can take it and plug it into your TV and keep playing the video game. And then when you're done playing on the TV, you can unplug it and then take it with you and continue playing your video game. So you don't ever have to stop playing video games, which sounds awful to me. That sounds like a nightmare. Who would want to keep playing video games? I can't stand video games. I don't like watching my kids play video games. So my son's coming. He's asking for this Nintendo Switch, and I'm telling him, man, I'm not so sure this is best for you. I'm not sure this is the best idea. And so he starts telling me though, but all my friends are getting Nintendo Switches, and so I need one too. And I'm like, Levi, I'm just not sure this is best for you, because Levi, you know how I feel about video games. He's like, Dad, come on. I don't want to talk about this again. I'm like, no, you know what I tell you about guys who play too many video games. He's like, Dad, come on. I'm like, Levi, what happens to guys that play too many video games? Dad, they never get girlfriends. That's right, Levi. Don't you forget it. Guys who play too many video games, they don't get girlfriends. What else happens to boys who play too many video games, Levi? Dad, come on. No, what else? They live with their parents for the rest of their life. That's right. And I love you, but you're not going to live with me for the rest of your life, okay? It's just not going to happen. And so I'm telling him, son, you decided to give your life to Jesus, and you got baptized last December. I got to baptize my son here. And so I said, we don't do things just because other people are doing them. We don't buy things just because other people are buying them. We don't go and do things or say things or whatever. We don't value things just because other people do. That's not what we're called to do as followers of Jesus. And so I'm not sure, Levi, I'm not talking about for anybody else, but for you and your personality, and because you love video games and stuff, I'm not sure this is what's best for you. So here's what I want you to do. I'm not going to tell you what we're doing. He's 10 now. I'm wanting him to learn how to make godly decisions and to do what's best in God's eyes, not in his or even mine, but to do what's best in God's eyes. And so I tell him, I said, Levi, I want you to go and pray about this. It's a small, large decision, regardless of how big a decision is, we want to pray about it, and we want to ask God, is this your best for me? And so I told him, I said, Levi, I want you to go pray about this. So he goes away, and about 15 minutes later, he brings me his birthday list. I was like, wow, that was fast. And so I look at his birthday list, and he's got the switch, he's got it crossed off, and in its place, he put guinea pig. I'm like, oh gosh. A guinea pig, Levi, you've got 2 guinea pigs. We don't need a 3rd guinea pig. Those things are a mess. They throw that garbage like out of their cage all over our kitchen floor. Their cage stinks. Like, I don't want a 3rd guinea pig. So we're gonna have to pray about this. God, we need your help. Like, we're gonna have to pray this. In fact, I was so tempted to just be like, you know what, forget the guinea pig. Let's just the Nintendo Switch. That was a great idea. Like, let's go with the first idea. Like, that wasn't such a bad idea after all. But one of the things I was telling him in that conversation is, Levi, we don't do things, buy things just because other people do it. As followers of Jesus, we're not called to mirror and copy the culture, society. In fact, Paul warned Timothy of valuing, as a follower of Jesus, of valuing the same things the culture values. He warned him against it. Timothy was his disciple. And so he warned his disciple, Timothy, about valuing, copying what the culture does and what the culture values. Watch what he tells his disciple, Timothy. This is 2 Timothy chapter 3, starting in verse 1. He says, you should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times for people, watch this, will love only themselves and their money and love pleasure rather than God. So Paul tells Timothy, listen, it's going to be normal for people in the last days. There's going to come a day when it's going to be normal for people to love money, pleasure, and themselves more than they love God. And here's the scariest part. Here's the worst part, he says. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that can make them godly. In other words, Paul's telling Timothy, listen, Timothy, religious people, church people who claim to be followers of Jesus are going to claim to be followers of Jesus, but they're going to really love money, pleasure, and self more than they love God. Church people are going to do this. And then watch what he says about people like this. He says, stay away from people like that, Timothy. Like Paul was telling Timothy, church people, religious people who claim to be followers of Jesus, yet love money, pleasure, and self more than they love God. You need to stay away from people like that, Timothy. They're dangerous. They're going to hurt you. Don't mirror and copy them and what they value. No, you're going to be different, Timothy. And I wonder if we aren't raising kids, like even as followers of Jesus, if we aren't raising kids, our kids, to love money, pleasure, and self more than they love God. Now, as a follower of Jesus, myself, I'm sure for you as a parent, you wouldn't do this intentionally. I would never do that intentionally. But I wonder if we're not doing it all the same. Teaching our kids to love money, pleasure, and self more than they love God. Paul told Timothy, you need to stay away from people like that. Because Timothy, they're going to hurt the mission of the church. They're going to hurt your spiritual life. They're going to hurt you living for what matters most in life, and that's for God, not for stuff. And so he says, Timothy, this is going to be normal. Like this is going to be the norm, even in the church. People are going to claim to follow Jesus, but they're going to love stuff more than they love God. And then he says, but you, Timothy, you're going to be different. Watch what he says. A few verses later, verse 10, he says, but you, Timothy, certainly know what I teach and how I live and what my purpose in life is. Like you've seen what is normal and what's going to be normal in the church, but Timothy, I'm different. And because of the passion and purpose and goal in my life is different than the norm, is different than the culture, yours as my disciple, as my follower, yours is going to be different because you're going to pattern your life and your purpose, your goals after me, not after the culture, but after what I've been doing. And so he says, you know my faith, my patience, my love, and my endurance. You know how much persecution and suffering I have endured. He's talking about the persecution and the suffering, the jail, the stonings that he endured for the sake of the gospel. And so Paul tells Timothy, listen, the culture, even the church culture, even the so-called Christian culture is going to live for money, pleasure, and self. But Timothy, you're going to be different. I'm different. You're going to be different. We're going to live for something different. Our goals are going to be different than the norm. Our purpose is going to be different than the norm. As a disciple, as a follower of Jesus, our life is going to look different than even people who claim to be religious. Timothy, you and I are going to be different. There's going to be a new norm for us. We're not mirroring the culture and what's normal for them. There's going to be a new normal for you and I, Timothy. And wouldn't you love it to be true of you, parents? That your kids see something in you, a different way of living, a different purpose, a different goal, a different passion. They see something different in you than they see in the rest of the world, and they want what you've got. They want the fire and the passion that you've got. They want to model their life after your life and not after the culture. Man, I'd love that to be true in my house. But if it's going to be true and we're going to have purpose and goals like Paul had, like Timothy had, and not like the culture had, then we need to do some things. And number one, you need to examine your goals. You need to examine your goals. If you want your heart to beat for what the Father's heart beats for, then you need to examine your goals. You might think, well, we don't really have like stated or written goals like for me and in our family, but I can promise you that you've got unwritten goals, you've got unwritten purpose, you've got unwritten things that you and your house, that your family, that you value. I promise. Just look at your weekly schedule, look at your checkbook, and you'll find probably a lot of times your unwritten goals and purpose and values for your family. Like right now, if you were to look at our weekly schedule, you would think we value church and work and school and baseball. We're playing a lot of baseball right now. And so if you were to look at our schedule, we wouldn't necessarily probably say as a family like baseball is high on our priority list. But if you were to look at our schedule, you would say, well, it's not written, it's maybe not stated, but you value baseball. Come on, Clayton. And that would be true. You see, we need to examine the messages that we're sending to our kids about what we value, about what's most important, because trust me, whether you realize it or not, they're receiving a message from you. You're communicating to them about what you and your family value and what's most important. You see, a lot of times we just do what the culture tells us to do. We want our kids to be well-rounded and educated and respectful and to have a high self-esteem. And so we do the things that society, that culture tells us to do in order to get that product. And so we take them to school and we put them in sports and we take them to church and we do all the things that we think we're supposed to do, but sometimes we're not stopping to think about the why behind what we're doing or the messages that we're sending to our kids, maybe even unintentionally. Ted Tripp, in his book, Shepherding a Child's Heart, said this, that often as parents, we don't realize it, but often as parents, we're raising our kids to idolize material things, stuff. And the worst part about it, he said, a lot of times we're actually feeding that idolatry of materialism. You might think, well, how do we do that? Well, here's what he said in his book, Shepherding a Child's Heart, which this series has been based on. He says, we pander to their desires and wishes. We teach them to find their soul's delight in going places and doing things. We attempt to satisfy their lust for excitement. We fill their young lives with distractions from God. We give them material things and take delight in their delight in possessions. Then we hope somewhere down the line they will see a life worth living is found only in knowing and serving God. He says oftentimes as parents we're feeding the idolatry in our kids' lives of materialism. We don't even realize it. You see, we need to examine our goals. We need to examine maybe the unstated, the unwritten messages that we're sending, the values that that we have the purpose and the goals and the things that we're living for in our families. We need to examine those things and see what message we're sending about what's most important. A couple of years ago, Levi was playing baseball. It was about this time of year, and his team was doing pretty good, but they were down by a couple runs in this game, and Levi hit an in-the-park home run, and so it scored 3 runs, and we ended up winning the game. I was helping coach that team, and so when he came across home plate, I came running out, and I was going to give him a high five and tell him how great he did, but as he came across home plate and he saw me coming out to him, he ran, and he jumped up into my arms, and I caught him, and I gave him a huge hug, and it was like you could hear from the crowd this like, "Oh, isn't that so sweet?" It was a perfect moment. It was so cool. We get home that night, we're doing bedtime, and I was telling Levi how proud I was of him, and I do that often, and I tell him why I'm proud of him. And that night I said, "Levi, I'm so proud of you." And he said, "Because I hit the home run, right?" I said, "Yeah, that was cool, but that's not ultimately like why I'm proud of you, because what's most important? That we won the game. Yeah, that's cool too, but that's actually not what's most important. What's most important, Levi? That we had fun while we were winning the game. Yeah, that's good too. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with home runs and winning a game and having fun winning the game. That's all great and good. But Levi, that stuff's not most important to me. And yeah, I'm excited that you hit that home run and that y'all won the game and that you had fun doing it. But that's not ultimately why I'm proud of you. That's not the most important thing to me. You see, somewhere along the way, over the course of that season, I had been telling him so much about how proud I was of him, of how he was playing baseball and how good he was getting at playing a game, that somehow I began to send the message that was what was most important to me in his life. And so I said, "Levi, again, there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. It's all great and good and fine. But I want you to know, Levi, that's not what's most important." I said, "Levi, we've talked about this before, but I just want to remind you again, I want to repeat this, that what is most important is loving, following, serving, worshiping Jesus. And when you take steps of faith, like when you step out in faith, when you're obedient to Jesus, when you serve Jesus, when you worship Jesus, when I see you loving Jesus, loving other people," I said, "Levi, that's when I'm most proud of you. Is when I see you following Jesus. Because that's what's most important." And I told him, I said, "Levi, I just want you to know that in my view, in my opinion, in my eyes, baseball has nothing." Please hear me. Like I'm telling my own son. Baseball has nothing on following Jesus, worshiping Jesus, serving Jesus. Money has nothing on worshiping, serving, following Jesus. Fill in the blank. Whatever you can come up with. Whatever it is that you value, that you spend your time doing or maybe spend your money on, it holds nothing compared to Jesus. You see, we need to make sure that we're sending the right messages to our kids and to our families so that we don't end up feeding the idolatry of materialism or stuff. We need to examine our goals. And then number two, you need to rework your goals. You need to rework your goals. Maybe those unstated goals or messages or values in your family, you need to rework those. And here's how you can do it. I'm going to give you a new filter for a new normal. A new filter for a new normal. Paul told Timothy, listen, it's going to be normal for church people, for religious people, to act like they love God, but in reality, they really love money, pleasure, and self more than they love God. That's gonna be normal. But Timothy, I'm different, you're different. There's gonna be a new normal. And so if you want a new kind of normal in your life and your family so that maybe the heartbeat of your family is more in line with the heartbeat of God, where your family begins to value the things that God values, then you need a filter by which you can create a new normal in your family. And so here's the filter that I want to give you. In the 1600s, some theologians got together and they put together what was called the Westminster Shorter Catechism. And it was a series of questions and answers to those questions that would help you know and remember truth from God. And kids would learn it from the time they were little, and as they would grow up, they would learn these questions and the answers to those questions to help them remember truth from God's Word. It would teach basic theology. If you grew up in a Presbyterian church, you're probably somewhat familiar with these questions, especially the question that I'm going to give you here in just a second. Because most little kids grow up in Presbyterian churches learning this question that I want to be, and I want to challenge you to make the new filter for your goals, purposes, and values in your family. So here's the question. What is the chief end of man? What is the chief purpose or goal of mankind? And here's the answer to that question. What is the chief end of man? It's to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. It's to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I would write that down if I were you. The chief end of man, the chief purpose or goal of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So that should be the chief purpose in your family. To glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Now you might be thinking, well, where do you get that? Well, that comes from Colossians chapter 1 and many other places, but in Colossians chapter 1, Paul says that you were created by God for God. By God, for God. The Creator designed you to do this life for Himself. And that's the only place you're going to find joy, fulfillment, and satisfaction and peace is living your life for God, for His glory, for His name, for His honor. That's the only way. Because the designer created you that way. You were designed to live life for God and for His glory. And so when you reject that or when you turn from that or when we don't do that, all we find is destruction, dissatisfaction, brokenness, regret. Because we try to do life in a way that we weren't designed to do it. We go against our very nature. We go against the wiring, the hard wiring that God put in us to worship and to serve Him and to bring Him glory alone. So this is the new filter I want you to filter your goals through. So here's kind of what that might look like. We want our kids to be successful. We want them to get a great education and go to college and have a great job where they can make a lot of money, and we want them to be successful. And a lot of times we don't maybe think about it, but that translates into, because that's what they've seen in us a lot of times, is houses and cars and boats and stuff. But if we filter the desire for our kids to be successful, which isn't a bad desire in and of itself, if we filter that through the chief end of man, well, now we can still want them to be successful, but it's for a different purpose. The why has changed. Now, the purpose of being successful or making money is to glorify God, and it's to enjoy Him forever. So now, when I make money, it's not my money, it's God's money that He's blessed me with. And I get the joy and the privilege and the satisfaction to spend the money that God has blessed me with on the things that His heart beats for His purposes, for His goals, for His mission. It's not about spending it on myself. I'm not going to find any joy or happiness or peace in spending all of God's money on myself. That's not the way I was created to do this life. So we filter that desire for our kids' success through the chief end of man, and now They can be successful, but it's for a different purpose. It's to glorify God and it's to enjoy him forever. The same could be true for almost anything. Put it in its place. What about conflict? Well, a lot of times in conflict, it's about revenge or at least getting even or son, don't you swing the first punch, but if someone swings at you, you finish the fight, right? I mean, that's a lot of times the advice that we give our kids. Is that biblical? Is that in the Bible? Well, what if we begin to channel even conflict, the way we handle conflict, through the chief end of man? Well, now it's about glorifying God and enjoying him forever. So now conflict is an opportunity to show others the grace and the mercy of God, to show the same forgiveness that God used towards us. What about self-esteem? We want our kids to have a great self-esteem, to think highly of themselves, not have a low self-esteem. If we filter that goal or that desire through the chief end of man, well, now it's no longer about thinking much of myself, it's about thinking much of God. And seeing myself through his eyes, that he created me in his image. And so because I'm created in his image, I've got value and worth because of who God created me to be. But it's not thinking much of myself, it's about thinking much of God when I filter that desire for my kids to have a good self-esteem through the chief end of man. So when we were having the conversation with Levi about the Nintendo Switch, one of the things I asked him, I said, Levi, do you think it glorifies God to spend all your time on a video game system and neglect your family? And he said, no. I said, listen, Levi, you're going to grow up. You're going to be a man. You're probably going to get married. You're going to have a family one day. Do you think it glorifies God one day to spend all your time when you're married and have kids on a video game system and neglect your family? No. Fill in the blank. Does it glorify God to spend all your time at work and neglect your family, Levi? No. I said, man, I've struggled with that some. I haven't always done that well, and I'm sorry. I said, Levi, do you think it glorifies God to spend all your time hunting, playing golf, playing baseball? Fill in the blank. You see, I want to teach him now that spending all my time doing something, being addicted to something and neglecting my family does not glorify God. So that hopefully as he has his own family one day, he'll filter those decisions in the way that he lives his life through the chief end of man to glorify God and to enjoy him forever, and to help my family glorify God and enjoy him forever. And he'll make godly decisions, better decisions than I ever made. That's my prayer. You know, as a parent, God has made it our chief end, our chief purpose, to love God with all of our hearts, ourselves, and to teach our kids to love God with all of their hearts. God told this to Israel. Watch in Deuteronomy chapter 6. He said, listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. Then watch this. Parents, repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you were at home and when you were on the road and when you were going to bed and when you were getting up. Tie them to your hands. Wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. God told the Israelites, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Teach your kids to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. And one of the ways that you can do that is by talking about this all the time. When you go to bed, when you get up, when you're on the road. And another way you can do that is by repeating it over and over and over again. And then finally, he says, to teach your kids to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, put it up all over your house. Put reminders up all over your house. And so this week, I want to challenge you to do something maybe pretty simple. Put the chief end of man up in your house somewhere. It could be on a piece of paper, a canvas, or something. Here's what we did this week. We have a chalkboard we put verses on in our kitchen, and we changed out the verses with the chief end of man. What's the chief end of man? It's to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And we got to talk about that with our kids last night at bedtime. and pray that we and our family would be ones that live to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So maybe something simple you could do with your family this week is to put the chief end of man up in your house, where this idea, where this concept could be repeated over and over and over again. Where so you could talk about it and pray about it together as a family. You know, when I graduated high school, I went to this conference. It was called One Day. There's 20,000 college students there. It was outside in this field, and it was a day of worship and prayer and teaching, and I had just started following Jesus, so a lot of this was all brand new to me, but I'll never forget, there's this old pastor that came out. Never seen this guy before, never heard of him before. I was like, who is this guy? And he started telling this story about two ladies in his church that when they were in the 80s, instead of retiring and doing what most people do, they left everything, sold everything, and they moved to Cameroon to become missionaries, to tell people about Jesus. Well, one day as they were driving to a village to tell some people about Jesus, they got in a car wreck, their car went off a bridge, and they fell to their deaths. And people were telling them, what a tragedy. Those ladies left everything to go and tell people about Jesus, and they died in a car wreck, and he said, what a tragedy. He said people from all over the country were writing them, messaging them, calling them. He said one of the things we kept hearing over and over and over is other people telling us what a tragedy this was. And he looked at us and he said, college students, was that a tragedy? He said, no. It wasn't a tragedy. He said, I'll tell you a tragedy. And he pulled out a copy of Reader's Digest. Now I know probably 75% of you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, but it's this old magazine, and long story, but anyways, so he pulls out this copy of Reader's Digest. He starts reading about a story in Reader's Digest. It was about a couple who made tons of money and they got to retire early. And so they moved to Florida, bought a beach home, had a huge yacht. And the whole story is about how they spent their days collecting seashells. And he looked at us and he said, that's a tragedy. Like, what? How is that a tragedy? What's tragic about that? That's the American dream, right? He said, that's the tragedy. Because imagine standing before God and say, God, look at my seashells. Aren't they amazing? He said, God doesn't care about your collection. May not be seashells for you, just fill in the blank. He doesn't care about your collection. That doesn't matter in light of eternity. He said, that's the tragedy. And then he looked at us and he said, don't waste your life. Don't waste your life on things that matter. He said, everyone is spending their life on something. Every family is spending their life on something. Spend your life, spend your time on the things that matter. Would you stand up right where you're at all of our campuses? Our band's gonna lead us in a song here in just a second. And as you stand, I want you to bow your heads, close your eyes, and just begin to pray. And here's what I wanna ask you to pray. God, do my kids see a fire and passion in me for Jesus? Do they see a love for Jesus in me? Do they see a passion for the glory of God and to enjoy Him forever? Do they see that fire in me? And if not, as we sing this next song, make it your prayer. God, set a fire in me that I can't contain, that I can't control. Set a fire in me, God, for the glory of God, for the things of heaven. God, my heart has strayed away. See the height from which I've fallen. See the height from which you have fallen. See how far off we've gotten. And God, help us to repent and turn from our sin and turn back to our first love, Jesus, the name that's above every name, that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that He is Lord. God, help us to turn away from the idolatry of materialism and begin to worship you alone again.
Thanks for spending some time with us today. If you'd like to know more about what God is doing at Experience Life, you can visit our website at experiencelifenow.com. Please let us know if we can serve you or your family in any way. We hope to hear from you real soon.